Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you're at, ladies and gents. I am Kura Isagami, your resident tinkerer and Medarotter, and this is the Medarot News Network, hosting a very special episode this time around. For once, I actually want to take a moment and highlight some of the founding members behind a lot of the translation efforts we've had in recent, especially with the Medarot 3 translation project I have mentioned in several previous episodes ongoing. And with that being said, I do want to take a minute and officially introduce my guest speakers for me today. Variant and Why. How are you guys doing today?
Pretty good.
Not too bad. Great to have you guys with me, and thank you so much for being able to take a little bit of 30 minutes to an hour or so and just kind of talk about this and get it all up and running. Like I said, I really do want to take a moment and just kind of showcase and put a spotlight on all the work and efforts that you guys have been doing in recent. Just to kind of say a big thank you and kind of showcase more of the community. A lot of the backstage stuff that no one really knows or pays attention to when it comes to those kind of projects. But with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and jump right in here real quick to just kind of the nitty-gritty of what we're talking about and some of the core questions I did mention that we can kind of talk about with the discussion. Let me go ahead and get that up and running here. All right, and then there we go. All right, perfect. So before we do get started officially on the translation project itself, I wanted to take a moment and kind of take a moment to get to know you guys better and kind of put the spotlight on you guys. So Variant, if you don't mind going first for me real quick, can you take a minute, kind of tell me about yourself, previous experiences with coding, translation, any other projects of note that you want to talk about?
Yeah, sure. Let's see. So, I started working on translation stuff back in the 2010s-ish. Sort of been into reverse engineering and that stuff for a long while. I used to, dabble in like Ragnarok Online initially as if you've heard of it, it's just, an old MMO. And so, I sort of started with that, played around with that when I was in middle and high school, and then was really into Phantasy Star. And so when Phantasy Star Online 2 came out in 2012, I decided to get involved into translating that project and did some reverse engineering stuff for that. And that sort of took up the, little chunks of, 8 years.
Eight years. That's quite some impressive tenure there working with this. So I'd say you're more or less kind of a pro in the business now at this point, aren't you?
Well, with that stuff, it was more just hacking around and trying to get things translated. It was more along the lines of initially I did it because I wanted to play the game in English, and I was like, I can't read Japanese, but I can do this thing so that other people can translate, right?
Totally understandable, and you're probably looking at that same experience with Medarot going, wow, deja vu.
Yeah, so actually with Metabots 1, I had started looking into it way back in 2012. And so that was when, I found Kimbles and Sankey, who had already done some work on Metabots 1 and all the translation stuff for it. And so at that time, the project was sort of in a proof of concept hacky state. It wasn't really workable. And so after I guess finding time over the course of 8 years, I finally, got around to starting it back up, and then I ended up roping Andwhyisit in it somehow. So that was really, really helpful. So actually, it's worth mentioning that once Andwhyisit got involved, the project really took off from there, and I think that was back in 2018.
That sounds about right too, because I've definitely been keeping an eye on the projects too in a while. But definitely great to hear about that, especially with all the years that you've been kind of just tinkering around with it in the meantime. Thank you so much for all that effort, and thanks for that brief introduction as well. NY, your turn. Care to take a minute and kind of talk about yourself, any previous projects or experiences that you've had?
Right, so so for me, it all pretty much started in 2008 with the Telefang translation project. So back then, none of us knew anything about how to hack a game, anything. We were just learning as we went. But eventually, one of our members came up with a way of actually figured out how the compression method was for graphics in the game, how it worked, and that same compression method happened to be used in the Medarot games. So eventually, Variant came knocking on our door and was asking about the compression method, and I was like, all right, I've just about finished everything I can do for Telefang, so for a while. So new project. Hey Variant, I'm gonna come help you out.
They're like, perfect. I ran out of things to do at just the right time.
But yeah, you'll find the.
Just go. What perfect timing! I just finished this project, and I was just starting to look for a new one. What do you know?
Well, it's not finished, but my part in the project's mostly finished. It's mostly just translation work from here on out.
Right. But yeah, you said back in 2008. You said is when you started tinkering around with all this.
Yep.
Wow, that's quite some impressive years of work in the biz too. To both of you, thank you so much for all the efforts that you have. That has indeed given us a working patch of Medarot 1, and currently en route with Medarot 3, and with all the work you guys have put into that, it definitely shows. So thank you so much for that. On the topic of the Medarot 1 translation, I know Variant did kind of tag on it and just a little bit with his introduction. How was the progress ultimately on that one, and the kind of the process on how you guys kind of figured out that new rhythm that kind of saw that one to completion at the end of the day?
I mean, what version are we on now? Like 0.6.7, because I can't, put a 1.0 on it until I'm like 100% sure that there's no bugs.
That's perfectly understandable, though. You have an eye for detail, and if so much as like one decimal's out of place, like, nope, not worth it.
That project is.
I made the joke the Medarot 3 will be complete at version 2.6.
0.2.6, yeah.
Oh, sorry, 0.2.6.
Yeah, but at the rate you guys have been going, I know there was a relatively long lull for a while, and then suddenly progress started really picking back up.
Yeah, so that's mostly on me. So when I initially started the project, so like Andwhyisit, I was not really familiar with Game Boy ROM hacking. I sort of jumped into it. I didn't know about the existing tools. I didn't know about BGB or, the RGB DS tool chain or any of that stuff. So I was going into it and like writing up hacky scripts in Python to like dump text and being like, oh, damn, this sucks. And eventually, when I got involved with the work that had already been done for Medarot 1 by Sankey and Kimball's, I ended up sort of going through and reorganizing it, making it more workable, taking it from a proof of concept into something that we could turn into a patch. And I think what ended up happening was that I would work on it, and then I would hit a major stopping block. Like, at some point it was like, oh, well, it's time to recompress tile maps, or hey, this routine is slightly different, or text doesn't rebuild correctly, and I would just be like, I got a full-time job. I'm going to go do that instead.
Totally understandable, yeah.
But yeah, that was around when I trapped Andwhyisit.
So one person I would like to point out who's helped with hacking side of all this immensely is in the Telefang project, the work of Kami Stacks, who or Kami Stack, however his name's pronounced. This assembly work that he did showed us with a lot of the things in M1 that wasn't working correctly, we could just reference the code in Telefang and see how it was supposed to work.
So you kind of had a side-by-side comparison at that point, because you already had a somewhat working model that you could point back to and say, okay, why isn't this working? Let's look at how it should be.
Yeah, because let's be honest, Medarot 1 was a very broken game with a mountain of band-aid fixes on it to keep it running.
That honestly, according to friends of mine as well, that does sound kind of like a norm for a lot of the really early Game Boy games, especially for a startup company like where Imagineer was at the time. You know, when Medarot 1 was, you know, their it game, you know, that got them off the floor for that franchise. And even in the community, they did mention as well that it's very commonly and endearingly known as like a proof of concept more than anything else, because of how rickety it is compared to how polished even Medarot 2 picked up right after.
Yeah, I heard that the programmer for the game was actually not hired as a programmer.
I imagine that's got look kind of awkward on the resume.
Yeah. So they got more staff since then, but obviously they didn't have the manpower for Medarot 1, and it shows.
Yeah, and pretty much like we call it, you know, Medarot 1 was indeed that proof of concept, just to kind of show, hey, let's see if this process works, because we do have to remember roughly at the same time, you know, Pokemon and Digimon also were just kind of starting out too. And they really picked up and took off. So Medarot was kind of stuck there with its pretty much like you said, band-aid code saying, "Hey, we got this over here. It kind of works. What do you think?"
Oh, so with Medarot 1, actually, I mean, I was thinking about it just in relation to the topic. So we were, there's always like, what about an official English patch for Metabots 1, right? Is that ever in the cards? And it's like after you go in working on Metabots 1, and you think about it and you're like, honestly, I can't ever imagine that they could pay anyone enough to come back and look at this.
You're probably like,
example,
you're probably looking from an outside perspective. It's like, why can't we have an English localization? You look in the code. Oh, that's why.
Yeah, well, it's. I think we ran into one issue super early on. I think Andwhyisit ended up implementing a variable with font so that we could display English characters in a way that was a little more sane, and it ended up causing a slight frame delay, enough such that audio started skipping.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, and so it would be this thing where you'd play the game and you'd talk to an NPC, and I would just hear this little clip, and I would have to differentiate. I'm like, is this my computer? Or is this like an actual bug?
The problem with how M1 works is that there are different parts of the ROM called banks that you've got to switch between, and for a lot of games you have to track what current bank you're on. There's no inbuilt process for doing that, but M1 didn't. So the sound engine they couldn't have during interrupts where it could be asynchronous, because they couldn't make bank switch during an interrupt in order to get at the audio stuff. So it was the situation that if anything took too long, it would cause the audio to skip.
Oh, lovely. So that, I'm sure that created a lot of headaches in the long run when working on Medarot 1.
Yeah. Well, not just that.
Everything was so timing dependent.
Wow.
We ended up fixing that, and then a little bit later when we were working on Row Battles, we realized that the animation was dependent on like interrupt timing, and so the animation ended up having a bunch of issues after we fixed sound.
Wow,
so,
that's nuts, honestly. But it also kind of goes to show how interlinked like game dev and coding of such would be, showing that everything works and all the effort that goes into it.
the
I
code that I'm most proud of is is the interrupt handler that we had to rewrite. Is probably like my most like flaunted code in that entire code base.
Nice, nice. Just to kind of move forward with this,
uh,
though. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Anwai.
uh, honestly, honestly, I'm always joking about Medarot 1 PTSD.
Yeah, I do vaguely remember seeing that in the group chat for that channel too, as you guys were working on that. But kind of just keep this moving along. With the progress that's been ongoing with Medarot 3, you said it's mostly just HUD menus and a lot of like row battle or part or I think in recent shop menus as well has currently been finished.
Yeah. So actually, so Metabots 3 has like a much more structured workflow than Metabots 1. I think we both learned how to, I guess we both picked it up fairly quickly in that sense, taking every lesson learned from Metabots 1. So yeah, the way it tends to work is so Andwhyisit will go through and effectively he'll go and disassemble, annotate, and do all of the uh, the nitty gritty, making sure we have all of the routines we need. He'll go through the Japanese game and find all the screens that need translation, disassemble them, and get those ready. And then I'll go in and start working on the translations and dumping graphics we need and like things like that. And
Nice.
so by doing that, we can work in parallel without like interfering too much with each other.
Right, so you have one basically harvesting the code and figuring out what it needs to say or how it's supposed to work, and then with the assets in hand, you just kind of translate that to what you want it to do with the same rhythm.
Yeah, something like that. Pretty much.
Nice, nice. With that being said, would you guys also happen to have a basic like story or understanding of how Medarot, kind of like the story behind Medarot 3? Because we know with like Medarot 1, of course, it's the adventures of Hikaru and the original Metal Beetle, or Head Scissors, depending on version. Medarot 2 introduces the Icky and Company with Metabee and all the iconic characters. Medarot 3, I believe, takes off pretty much right where 2 leaves off, but what's kind of the core story of that, if you guys found anything or have any idea of that?
So I haven't played too much of it actually. I'm pretty bad about playing games until even when I'm working on them. But effectively, it's Icky meets aliens, and it's pretty sick.
Oh, fun. How about you, NY? Any kind of feedback on that you've noticed through segments of Medarot 3's code, or haven't quite had a chance to look at that in detail?
Honestly, I've only made it through the first chapter of the game, and to be fair, that was before any of the text was translated, so I had no idea what was
I gotcha. Alright, I figured it wouldn't hurt to ask since you guys were doing the deep dive. Based on what I did hear, or at least based on what is understood of the story, I know the first chapter is the introduction of basically everybody being forced to start from ground zero, since I believe it was the gym teacher at the time, or their new school teacher, basically took all their meta watches and reset all their combat data. So it's like taking all the hard work and effort that you put into, learning learning to get to know Metabee or Rokusho, depending on game version, and suddenly it's like, hey, perfect, let's factory reset this sucker and start all over again.
Yeah, I will admit that I think both Andwhyisit and I are really, really not the people to ask about story.
All right, well, like I said, I figured I'd at least ask. That's perfectly fine. With that being said, though, with it being mostly just HUD menus at this point that's translated, what's the current progress on that? I know Variant has been really working hard on getting the internal menus like the meta parts and the shop menus up and running. But what is something else that you guys have been working on recent that's the kind of the currently completed?
Yeah, so actually, recently we realized that the password menu uses sprites that we need to translate, and Andwhyisit, with his Telefang PTSD, decided to, he's been dumping that routine, and so my next task is to dump those sprites. But as far as progress there goes, honestly, if you picked up the game right now and just played it, it would probably be pretty playable. The only things are that when you receive items, like in dialogue when it says Icky got blah or Metabee used an attack or something like that, stuff like that isn't finished, but honestly, it's not going to crash the game.
So it's essentially like the core menus at this point, just to kind of get you, figure you out where to go and what to do that are, currently finished or almost done.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. What about story? I'm assuming you guys haven't touched on that yet, or still kind of dabbling in it when you can.
There are 37 text so all of the text that was the first thing we did. We dumped all of the text, and there are 7,500 something odd total lines of text.
Wow.
And yeah, pretty much that is actually something we need translators for, and that is sort of the biggest, the looming crisis, I guess, is we're going to be done with hacking and it'll just be translations. So.
I gotcha. So it's basically like all the menus and mechanics will be finished, but but we still have no idea on story.
Yeah, and actually I can probably just pull that up. It is so with the people who have contributed, just in their spare time, they've done what they can. We've got about 1,436 lines sort of just translated, not edited or quality checked or anything, but just translated. And that's out of 7,521. So we're a little under 20%, about 19%.
Okay. Well, that's not too shabby either. Nice, good start.
Yeah.
Right.
On top of that, there's lists and part names and things like that need to be checked. So.
And NY, anything else on this that you've been working on in tandem or on your own?
Well, occasionally occasionally I do jump back onto the telephone paying project where it's needed, but yeah, pretty much it's just M3 in telephone at the moment.
Right. Right, so ultimately you guys said it's primarily the passwords you're currently working on, and then I think you said a couple other miscellaneous menus, and then essentially everything but story would be finished, right?
So actually, I think password might be the last known thing that isn't translated.
So
I need to dump all of the link related stuff and
oh yeah, link battles
and credits if we can get a save that's like before the credits or something.
Yeah. So. Okay, so link battles and credits and the password screen. So those three things are the last known screens that aren't translated, and then...
the chapter titles, yeah.
Oh, and the chapter. Okay, so but those are just like a single tile set that we need to go translate, yeah.
So still pretty solid progress, just based on from when you guys first started on 3. That's honestly fantastic thus far. And for folks that are actually watching this right now, as they're as well as listening, I do actually have a couple of various clips that were shared with me from the progress on that, just kind of playing on a loop right now. And pretty much as you see here, with the internal menus, the shop menus, everything's looking fantastic so far. And pretty much like you said, Variant, it is essentially playable at this point. And then just basic common sense to figure out where you go from there.
Yeah, I guess the biggest thing is really just is translations. I don't know. Like, I think as far as the hacking goes, Andwhyisit and I are making decent progress. We will be done fairly soon at the pace we're going.
It's just mostly just actually translating the story that we need the most help with.
Yeah, and it's not just story, too. The 7,500 lines of text also includes stuff like part descriptions and any other help text and things like that. But yeah, that huge chunk of text, I think once that gets translated, even without the link menu and the password menu, it's totally playable.
That's really good, though, to hear. I mean, a lot of folks, look at translation projects and say, oh, well, they're still working on translating, this menu, that menu, or the other. They still got a long way to go. But based on the way you guys are explaining it, you guys are more or less kind of almost finished, or if anything, over the crest of the hill, essentially on that downhill finish.
Yeah, I would say that. I think, I mean, it's sort of like what's the phrase? Doing everything that we can, and then just sort of leaving it to fate to see if we get any translators on it.
Right, and I have mentioned this before, I will continue to say it. We are hugely appreciative of the efforts that you guys, as well as Kimball's and Tobias and everyone else who sadly could not be with us, for this particular panel. That for all the effort that you guys have put into to make the Medarot 1 translation the reality that it has become, as well as the ongoing efforts towards 3. Kind of moving forward from this, because we kind of actually knocked two of my points here in one fell swoop with the struggle areas and what we're and priority that you're looking for. I know you guys have made comments in past as well with saying wanting to work on, say, Medarots 4, 5, and Navi at some point. And I think I did hear about one or two of you guys working on, at least dumping the initial code to see how much work was needed to be done. Have you guys had a chance to look at that in recent, or was it just kind of like a once over?
For Metabots 4 and 5, so actually, Kimballs isn't here, but it's worth mentioning that she actually went through a lot of those games years ago, almost 10 years ago now. She went through all of the Metabot games and sort of annotated random pointers she found for text and things like that. And from her findings, Metabots 4 is very, very similar to 3. And apparently Metabots 5 is pretty different.
Right.
So I suspect that somehow if we go and we get through the hacking work for Metabots 3 and it's just translations...
you pretty much
depending on
knocked
how
out a
much
good
time-
chunk of 4 as well.
Yeah, well, at the very least, we'll have a really good reference point to start with.
Yeah, because pretty much
Yeah.
like NY said, Medarot 1 was basically like what'd you guys say, Band-Aid work? So it wasn't necessarily like a consistent reference point, I guess, for lack of a better term, in terms of how it should work or how it should behave, because it was just kind of like that old jalopy you use once, to showcase, and then you just kind of, toss it in the garage, hoping it never sees the light of day again.
Honestly, I looked at the code for Medarot 3 and I breathed a sigh of relief. I was like, I can breathe again. No more horrible code. No more
No more Band-Aid code.
No more timing dependencies.
Nice.
I really want people to appreciate how much effort went into getting the link battles working in Metabots 1, by the way. That was actually a nightmare.
I imagine so.
That was hell.
I imagine it was, especially since it would have to, establish that proper connection and, ensure that, if the other player is using it, if they're not using it, or what have you.
Their connection code.
Yeah,
Their
I
connection
imagine.
code was very, very... Okay, so you remember the stuff about timing? All of the stuff with timing is especially sensitive during link, and so, God forbid we use variable with fonts while linking.
Wow, that's definitely kind of a mess you guys had to work with. But hey, at
I
least
spent like a week just rewriting that whole link routine.
yeah, but hey, at least with Medarot 1 behind you, essentially at this point it's just kind of like fine tuning any missed points that you perhaps overlooked or didn't see right away before that patch is officially I'd say 100% done, I guess. And with Medarot 3, you guys said is a lot cleaner, a little better fleshed out with its code. So pretty much like you guys said, been making great progress because it's a lot cleaner and easier to manage.
Yeah, it's much more structured. The biggest issue with Metabots 1 is that there was just duplicate code everywhere, so you would fix it in one place and it wouldn't be fixed in another place.
Wow.
And that happens a lot. So for example, the parts menu, you do it, and then you go into row battles and realize, oh no, the exact same lists are here, but none of the code swapped over, so you have to go do the exact same thing again.
So it'd be more a case of, because of the multiple lists, it'd be like they all have them as references, but they don't seem to all reference the exact one, but multiples of the same one.
Little bit like that. It was more along the lines of because we increased the text limit, so English characters obviously
I got you,
take
yeah.
more than Japanese. Yeah, so we would have we support 16 characters when you get to the parts menu through the main menu, but when you go try doing it in the Metabot screen, oh no, all of a sudden broken.
Oh, fun.
One of the important things about translating the English is that English takes twice as many characters to represent anything as Japanese.
That does sound about right, yeah.
So variable with fonts, they so you need variable width fonts you need increased limits for everything, and on top of that, we actually have a narrow font that automatically triggers just in case that's not enough.
I greatly suspect, especially with it being in the in the Game Boy, Game Boy Advance era too, why a lot of games such as say like the Mega Man Battle Network series, they had a lot of their a lot of the names for like battle chips or even I think navis to a point too, were actually abbreviated. So like instead of saying protector spelled all the way out, it might say something like PRCTR. And just kind of hard abbreviate it for the sake of saving characters. Is that kind of the same case here?
Yeah, you see that in Pokemon too and stuff like that. It's because a lot of games, when they're written for a Japanese audience, don't need to do any of these.
Right.
They can represent a lot with 8 characters, right?
Right.
8 characters is plenty. But as soon as you go into English, you're like, okay, do we want to rewrite this entire engine for a game that has to go out in like 2 months?
Oh,
or
fun.
do we want to, just abbreviate?
Right. I gotcha.
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much. I had a chance to. We mentioned the notion of variable fonts to Nob, who did the translated the original Pokemon games, and he's like, "Why didn't we have that?"
Yeah, I imagine
Oh,
so.
no, Osagawara? Yeah. He also did like the original Dragon Quest titles that were ported together. He's pretty big in
And Terranigma, I feel that deserves a mention. Great game.
Right. Right. But yeah, like I said, you guys have been making some fantastic progress on the Medarot 3 translation, so thank you so much for that. And all the continued efforts to kind of wrap that up and see it closer to completion. I know a lot of folks have been asking, for like I mentioned, 4, 5, and Navi, among other titles, as much as we would love to play them all. But of course, we don't want to completely swamp you guys with, all these titles we want to see done when it's only a team of, 6, 7, 8, or 9 tops if, everybody's in the server at once.
Honestly, the project on Medarot 3, the progress on Medarot 3 translation wise, I was honestly pretty jealous that it was like that it was already the 20% after this time. I mean, Telefang's sitting at like a bit below, a bit before the final boss and all of the post game stuff.
Oh wow!
After 13 years.
Wow. Just the time and dedication that goes into projects like that. This is just a chance to kind of marvel in that and just kind of appreciate it.
It's just we didn't have the same amount of manpower in terms of translators. We had enough people doing hacking work, but yeah, just not the manpower of translations.
Right. Yeah, but just
that's always the struggle.
Just to kind of call back real quick, you guys said for the most part you can handle the coding pretty solidly between the 3, 4, 5 of you, 5 of you or so, pretty efficiently without getting swamped or overloaded.
Do you mean for Telefang? For Medarots, it's only me and Andwhyisit that do any of the coding work.
Right, and that's pretty much, and you guys pretty much have all that handled pretty well. It's just primarily the translation work that needs done.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right. Well, just to kind of break on that, you have heard it from the from the heads of the project themselves, folks. Even though coders and cleaners are definitely greatly appreciated for this project, if you do have any knowledge in Japanese and have some time on your hands, would love to contribute toward an ongoing project, we are absolutely more than appreciative of anything that you'd be willing to provide, even if it is for a short time. Because as they said, there is, what did you say, about 7,000 lines of code thereabout?
7,500.
7,500, almost 7,600 lines of code to translate, and I'm told roughly.
Well, lines to translate, not code.
Right. So my mistake, slip of the tongue. But yeah, lots to translate primarily, since the coding work is pretty much finished at this point, or at least close thereof. So again, translators are greatly appreciated. Anyone who is perhaps, tunes into my channel, or even may somehow find this video thereabout wandering across the internet. We are greatly appreciative of any efforts that you'd be willing to provide or even help out with for a short time. And once again, I do want to kind of wrap us up here for a minute, since we are coming up on about the 35-minute mark, and just say thank you so much, both to Variant and to NY for kind of tagging in here with me and seeing all this to completion. So thanks again so much, you guys, for stopping by and taking a few minutes of your time to kind of talk about it.
Yeah, happy to.
All right, but with that being said, I do want to go ahead and just kind of wrap up here. So thanks again, folks, for stopping by. If you'd like to know more or keep up to date with any ongoing projects, you can follow us below. On Facebook, you can find me at the Medarot News Network page, or run the Metabots Forever communities on Facebook. You can also join us on Discord in the link provided and in the comments below, which will get you up to date and kind of get you your foot in the community to keep the most up to date with anything related to Medarot. This includes the Medarot 3 translation project, the Medarot Reloaded translation project, Medarot S gameplay, any other merch, or anything else related to the series. That is the first place you will hear it. You can also find me on Twitter at IsagamiKura, so if you have any questions, feedback, or comments, or any suggestions, my DMs are always open. Feel free to stop on by and stop by for a chat. And do also give these awesome folks here with me a follow as well. Variant at VariantXYZ on Twitter, who posts relatively frequently on the finished menus that he has worked on with the Medarot 3 translation, and Andwhyisit as well, who also does share those when he can. Once again, you guys, thank you so much for stopping with me and taking a chance to talk with me on the channel, just to kind of spotlight your efforts on this project.
Yep, thanks for having us.
All right, but that being said, thanks again for stopping by, folks. It's always happy to have you in for a visit. Until next time.